Picture this. You're a warrior's wife in ancient Greece, living peacefully with your husband and children. Your husband is brave, strong, and fights for your city-state with honor. But one day, he doesn't come home from battle. The news arrives that your city has been defeated, and your husband is among the fallen. You think your grief is the worst thing you'll face. You're wrong. What happens next is something so brutal, so unthinkable, that it will haunt you for the rest of your life. The Spartans are coming, and what they do to the wives of defeated warriors goes beyond anything you could imagine. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's darkest chapters. We're talking about Spartan conquest and the horrifying fate that awaited the women left behind. This isn't just another history lesson about ancient warfare. This is about understanding how war affected entire families and communities in ways that will shock you. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the mere mention of Spartan victory struck terror into the hearts of not just soldiers, but their loved ones back home. Let's start by setting the scene in ancient Greece around the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. Sparta wasn't just another city-state. It was a military machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Every aspect of Spartan society revolved around war, conquest, and maintaining power. When Spartans went to war, they didn't just aim to defeat their enemies on the battlefield. They wanted total domination. And that domination extended far beyond the soldiers they fought. The Spartan military philosophy was simple. Break your enemy completely so they can never rise against you again. This meant destroying not just their armies, but their entire social structure. The warriors were just the beginning. When a city fell to Spartan forces, the real horror began for the families left behind. Spartan commanders knew that killing enemy soldiers was only half the battle. The other half was making sure those soldiers could never be replaced. This is where the wives of defeated warriors entered the picture. These women, who had already lost their husbands in battle, faced a fate that was designed to be worse than death. The Spartans had a systematic approach to dealing with conquered populations. First, they would execute any remaining male warriors who survived the battle. Then came the elderly men who might organize resistance. But the women, they had a different purpose in Spartan plans. The wives of fallen warriors were particularly targeted because they represented something dangerous to Spartan control. They were mothers who could raise the next generation of warriors. They were keepers of their culture and traditions. They were symbols of their defeated city's identity. Spartans couldn't allow any of that to continue, so they developed methods that were both practical and psychologically devastating. The first thing Spartans would do was separate these women from their children. Imagine being a mother, already grieving your husband's death, and having your children torn from your arms. The children were either killed outright if they were boys who might grow up to seek revenge, or they were taken to become slaves in Sparta if they were deemed useful. The psychological trauma of this separation was intentional. Spartans understood that a woman's connection to her children was often stronger than her will to live. By breaking this bond, they broke her spirit. But the separation was just the beginning. Next came what historians call cultural erasure. These women were forced to abandon everything that connected them to their former lives. Their clothing, their jewelry, their religious practices, their language, even their names. Everything that made them who they were was stripped away. They were given new identities that served Spartan purposes. Many were forced to become concubines to Spartan soldiers. This wasn't just about satisfying physical desires. It was about domination and humiliation. These women, who had once been respected wives and mothers, were reduced to property. They had no rights, no protection, no hope of escape. The psychological impact was devastating, but some faced even worse fates. Certain women, particularly those from prominent families or whose husbands had been important military leaders, were were subjected to public humiliation. They were paraded through Spartan streets as examples of what happened to those who opposed Sparta. These public displays served multiple purposes. They entertained Spartan citizens who took pleasure in seeing their enemies humbled. They warned other potential enemies about the cost of resistance. And they completely destroyed the dignity and identity of the women involved. Some historical accounts describe these women being forced to perform degrading acts in public. They were made to renounce their former allegiances and praise their Spartan captors. Those who refused were tortured until they complied or died. The ones who survived often wished they hadn't. The Spartans also used these women as breeding tools. Remember, Sparta was always concerned about population and military strength. They believed that strong warriors could only come from strong bloodlines. So they would force these women to bear children with Spartan men. The children born from these unions faced their own terrible fate. If they showed promise as potential warriors, they might be raised as Spartans, but always as second-class citizens. If they didn't, they were often killed or abandoned. The mothers had to watch their children either disappear into Spartan society or be eliminated entirely. This created a cycle of trauma that lasted generations. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect was how Spartans twisted these women's natural instincts against them. Mothers were sometimes forced to watch their surviving children be trained as Spartan warriors. They had to see their own flesh and blood being turned into weapons against their former homeland. Some women were even forced to participate in their children's military training. They had to inflict pain on their own kids to make them stronger. The internal conflict this created was unimaginable. These mothers loved their children and wanted them to survive. But survival meant becoming everything they had been raised to oppose. Historical records from various Greek sources describe the long-term effects of these practices. Many women who survived Spartan conquest never recovered mentally. They became shells of their former selves, unable to form meaningful relationships or find joy in life. Some took their own lives when the opportunity arose. Others lived in a state of constant fear and depression. The few who managed to escape or were eventually freed often couldn't integrate back into normal society. They had been too damaged by their experiences. The impact on Spartan society itself was also significant. While these practices helped Sparta maintain military dominance in the short term, they created deep resentment among conquered populations. This resentment would eventually contribute to Sparta's downfall. But that's a story for another time. What's important to understand is that these weren't isolated incidents or the actions of rogue soldiers. This was official Spartan policy, approved and encouraged by their leadership. It was seen as a necessary part of maintaining their empire. The training that Spartan soldiers received actually included instruction on how to psychologically break conquered populations. They were taught to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities. Women's love for their children and their cultural identity were seen as weaknesses to be used against them. Modern historians have compared these tactics to psychological warfare techniques used in more recent conflicts. The goal wasn't just to win battles, but to completely destroy the enemy's will to resist, and it was terrifyingly effective. Cities that heard about the fate of conquered women often surrendered without a fight, rather than risk their families suffering the same fate. This reputation became one of Sparta's most powerful weapons. The fear of what would happen to their loved ones paralyzed potential enemies before battles even began. But this fear-based strategy also isolated Sparta from the rest of the Greek world. Other city-states began to see Spartans as monsters rather than fellow Greeks. This isolation would eventually weaken Sparta's position when they faced larger threats like the Roman Empire. The treatment of conquered women also created internal problems within Sparta itself. Some Spartan citizens, particularly women, began to question the morality of these practices. This led to social tension and philosophical debates about the nature of honor and justice. These debates would contribute to the gradual erosion of Spartan unity and purpose. The fate of defeated warriors' wives under Spartan rule represents one of history's darkest chapters. These weren't just casualties of war in the traditional sense. They were victims of a systematic campaign designed to destroy human dignity and break the spirit of entire populations. Their suffering was calculated, deliberate, and used as a weapon of war. Understanding these historical events helps us recognize similar patterns in conflicts throughout history. The tactics may change, but the strategy of targeting civilian populations to break enemy morale remains sadly common. These women's stories deserve to be remembered, not just as historical curiosities, but as reminders of the real human cost of ancient warfare. Their courage in the face of unimaginable suffering should inspire us to value the freedoms and protections we often take for granted today. What do you think about these historical practices? Have you heard similar stories from other ancient civilizations? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this historical deep dive as fascinating and disturbing as I did, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to create more content like this. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest historical explorations. Share this video with anyone who enjoys learning about the darker sides of ancient history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore another shocking chapter from our past.